Back when I first moved to New York City, I was running a software startup in the basement of a 1920s warehouse in Brooklyn. It was Python-based stuff, so totally unrelated to WordPress, but we were bootstrapped, so I was doing some consulting work on the side, and mostly Python consulting work. But one of our clients had written a book on WordPress, and she wasn't a developer herself, so she asked me if I could go and take on the work that was being generated from her book. And I was like, yeah, sure, why not? So I started doing that. She gave me her subscription to Woo Themes, so I got all those themes and plugins and whatever to work with. So I did that for a while until I got kind of tired of all the stuff that comes with freelancing other than coding, such as like bill collecting. So then I went and I talked to Woo Themes. My friend told me that they had a position open up. Since I was already using their themes and plugins, it was like, hey, I know your stuff inside out. I use it every day. Either I'll work for you or I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. And it ended up working out. So I joined them as a support ninja, and I did that for about a year and a half. I did support on themes and plugins, WooSlider, some of their other stuff like Sensei, whatnot, a little bit of WooCommerce, but they have a bunch of people that are specialized in just doing that. And then I started doing some development with them as well. So I led the WooSlider 2.0 release and added a whole bunch of pretty cool functionality to that. It's a slider plugin. People either love or hate sliders, and they tend to be everywhere. But anyway. After that, I joined a dating startup, which was based in Dumbo. It's called How About We? They had a media portion of the company, which is what I was working on. I was the lead WordPress developer, and it was like 4 sites on a WordPress multi-site install. And they ended up being acquired by Match.com OkCupid. And at that point, I went to Code and Theory, which is an agency based in Soho, but they have offices in London, Philippines, and California. So they're primarily a PHP shop. They have a great design team, and they have really good processes around everything, which was pretty fun to work in a nice environment like that with good project management going on. So I was working on Vogue magazine when I was there, and I was on a team of like around 9 or so people, and it was a pretty fun stack to work on. Obviously a pretty high traffic, very visible website. So when I came on, the project was in full swing. It was like the third leg of development. So I came in, and then it was kind of like 5 months of hustle and bustle and then get it out live. So after Vogue, I went to Ali Interactive, which is where I'm at now. And I'm a principal software developer there. Ali is a WordPress VIP agency. We work primarily on large news media sites as well as some large nonprofits. We do try to go and open source any code that we can. So we have a plugin called Field Manager, which does custom fields and stuff, and that's open source. And there are a few other ones. I think we might have a starter theme that's open source, and we're always looking to go and see what else we can go and put out there for the community. So who are you guys? Like, what's the breakdown? Who's a developer? Out of that, who's like a theme developer? Plugin developers? Cool. Designers? Writers, editors, bloggers? And I'm guessing everyone else is like marketing, strategy, SEO, or you came into the wrong place. Cool. Okay. So what is a plugin? I guess that's kind of the crucial point of the whole talk, right? So WordPress has this really arcane definition, and don't even read that because I really hate it. And it basically refers to plugins as being like a bunch of PHP functions using WordPress endpoints and blah, blah, blah for your weblog. And just seeing that right there is kind of like, weblog. Well, WordPress has become so much more than that over the last few years. It's gone from a blogging platform to a CMS to now it's turning into an application platform, and maybe tomorrow it's going to be something totally different, right? So in my mind, a plugin is basically a way to add functionality to or modify the functionality of WordPress. And that's pretty profound, and that's my bit of wisdom for tonight, so don't expect too much more from me there. But I think that does a pretty good job of like summarizing the gist of what you're going to do when you're trying to use a plugin. So that definition kind of exists in like a vacuum until you really understand the power that plugins play in the community, right? So plugins are created by the community, and people come to the community because of the plugins and the functionality that they offer. So when you want an e-commerce site, or you want to build a social network using something like BuddyPress, or you want to go and create the next cat picture sharing website, there's a plugin for that. And WordPress allows you to do that. If that functionality wasn't there, people would go and flock to some other framework. So while WordPress core is the backbone of WordPress, the community is really the other backbone. So story time. This is about the first plugin I ever built. It's called BP Tweet URLs. When I wrote this, I was not a programmer, and I didn't care about WordPress. This was back in the day when I had to walk 2 miles uphill both ways to go to school in the snow, right? So I made this when I was like sitting in a class one day. I wasn't a particularly good student. I was usually day trading or working on client sites or something rather than paying attention to class. Anyway, I ended up graduating, so it's okay. So this plugin, I was working for a campus organization site, and they had BuddyPress running on it, which allowed it to become like a social network for their organization. And back in that day, Twitter counted every single character of your URLs. So you wanted to use short URLs so that your character count stayed small and you can go and fit a message in with those 140 character counts, right? So this PHP script called YOURLs allowed you to go and create these shortened URLs with your custom domain. So you can go and register a short like 5-letter domain or something and then use this PHP script to go and generate these short URLs for you. So I integrated that with Twitter and made it work on BuddyPress, and I created this short social share link that would go and generate your custom branded short URL and go and send it off to whoever for this campus's, this organization's social site. So that was all nice and fun, except like I said, I wasn't really a programmer then. So what I did was I leveraged what came before me, right? So WordPress being open source, I found a plugin that did something kind of similar, right? And with it being GPL, I'm free to go and take that code and modify it however I see fit and create something bigger, better, different, maybe not better, but at least different, and go and build that and put that out there. And since I didn't care about WordPress, I wasn't intimidated by anything at all, so I went and I threw it on the WordPress.org repo. And then it was out there for everyone to go and benefit from or change however they felt like it. But over time, as I started to care about WordPress and about the community and everything around it, it became more intimidating to go and submit code that other people were going to see. I was, I guess, worried about what I thought other people would think of the code and if I would be judged for it or if I was doing something wrong and that kind of stuff. So it seems kind of counterintuitive that I would go and contribute to the community when I didn't care and not contribute when I did care. So if I had to go back and talk to myself back then, I would say, just submit everything you're doing that you possibly can without like breaking a contract or something like that. But it's the best way to grow, right? And we're all building stuff every day that I think is useful for other people out there to learn from or use to help them in whatever they're building. So when we talk about plugins and when they face off against themes, you usually hear the philosophical argument of keeping your presentation separate from your functionality. And apart from the philosophical argument there are definitely some practical benefits to going and keeping that separate too. When you go and have all your real functionality of the site existing in the theme, it can cause maintainability issues down the road, for example. So by keeping everything nice and separate, it allows you to go and make sure that you're able to go and update things as they need to be updated rather than being held back by a bunch of customizations or old versions that are being used in your theme. An example of the problems that come into play when you do stuff like that can be seen with something like Avada, which is like the #1 selling theme of, I guess, ever, according to that. So Avada is a theme on ThemeForest, and it sells really well because it bundles everything you can possibly think of in the world into the theme, which includes a whole bunch of plugins. Like it literally just takes plugins and puts them into the theme code. So the downside of that is that when a plugin has an issue that they didn't write, so for example, like it includes 5 slider plugins. It's a little bit overkill, right? And this guy here, Revolution Slider, I'm pretty sure it had a security issue that came up like 6 months ago or so. So any themes that were going and bundling this in there had a security issue. And it was a big pain in the butt for these people to go and have to worry about having their theme compromised because of some bundled plugin that was in there. And the plugin itself had gotten updated, right? So anyone that just had the standalone install of Revolution Slider could just go and hit that update button and be on the new version and know that they're secure. But because it's bundled in there, they have to go and wait for Avada to go and release a security patch and that kind of thing. Not that Avada is the only one that does this. There are tons of other people that do it. But by being #1, you kind of put yourself out there to be a little bit scrutinized. So apart from stuff like the sliders, it bundles a whole bunch of other things, such as like a visual page builder. So visual page builders are really cool. You go and you drag and you drop and you have this beautiful layout on your site, right? And it does that by going and shoving a whole bunch of shortcodes in your markup. And then when you go and decide to change your theme like 6 months or a year or 2 down the road and you activate a new theme, now you just have a bunch of broken shortcodes on your site and you have no way of like rendering that content anymore because the rendering functions that were part of that theme are no longer in your code base anymore. Similarly, with the shortcode generator type stuff that they allow, shortcodes are great, right? But if they're in your theme and you go and switch themes, now you just have a bunch of raw shortcodes showing on your page. And I ran into an issue kind of similar to that on my own personal site. I was using an older WooThemes theme, and it had a bunch of shortcodes that come with the theme. And then when I switched to using the 2015 theme, I think it was, now I just have a bunch of raw shortcodes on some of my posts, and I think they're still broken. I just haven't gotten around to fixing it. But now when someone goes and looks at my site, they see some broken content where they should be seeing something beautiful by this rendered shortcode that isn't there. So plugins do like everything you could possibly think of. Some of the more popular ones here, this is a tag cloud generated from the WordPress.org like plugins page. So widgets are totally popular. There's a widget for like everything in the world. Video stuff, you see like YouTube on there and whatever, shortcodes, etc. BuddyPress, and aside from the like 38,990 plugins that were on that other slide that are on the WordPress.org repository, there's also thousands of plugins that are on like GitHub, and BuddyPress has a repo for all the BuddyPress extensions that exist, and then WooCommerce has its own marketplace of WooCommerce extensions. So there are thousands and thousands of other plugins that exist aside from just being on WordPress.org. So plugins can be like big and small, and this one is probably the smallest plugin you can possibly have. If you can't read that, it's called FU Smart Quotes, excuse that. But anyway, what it does is it goes and it removes a filter that is part of WordPress core. And it's literally a one-line plugin. Take away all of the metadata that's up here that just describes the plugin and allows it to go and show the links and stuff in your admin dashboard or on the WordPress.org site. But all this does is remove the filter that allows for smart quotes. And smart quotes go and make your quotes curly, or decide when you're going to have a prime in your text and that kind of stuff, or single quotes, double quotes, whatever. So there's a whole bunch of logic that goes and decides if your quote is going to face to the left or to the right. And there are a whole bunch of edge cases that don't really get properly figured out. So some people just go and get rid of all of it so that you just have straight quotes going all the way through. And this guy was obviously really, really frustrated by the functionality of the smart quotes. So he decided to leave a few nice comments in his plugin and just go and add the one line to remove that single filter. With the filters and stuff, I mean, that obviously shows how flexible WordPress is, that you can just go and remove some part of core functionality with a single line like that. And then we have the huge stuff, like Jetpack, for example. And Jetpack is like a plugin with plugins, and that's like Inception, right? So yeah, they call them modules. And Jetpack is like this big bucket that you go and throw all these modules in, and they ship it all together. You don't choose what you get for the most part. You get a whole bunch of stuff together, and I think there are some that you can download separately, whatever, if you choose to. George Stefanis gave a really great talk here a few months ago where he talked about Jetpack and its functionality and why they develop things the way they do and go and have everything exist as these modules in one single thing rather than being able to pick and choose. And he had some good reasoning around it, which was cool to hear him talk about, because it really had to do a lot with the development cycle. So a lot of the modules go and utilize the WordPress.com API. So rather than going and have this code that does the same thing exist in all these different little modules, just have that code exist one time in one place, and know that they only have to go and update it once whenever they need to go and create a new release. Same thing with like internationalization strings, so that they can go and create translations. That they only have to have like one file for the translations going on there. So it makes for a much easier development cycle on their end. And I mean, I guess on our end, yeah, we have to suffer with a little bit larger of a download size, but oh well. Someone else is maintaining it anyway. Back when, not too far back, when WordPress acquired WooThemes, they mainly wanted it for WooCommerce, right? And when that happened, a bunch of people were speculating what would happen with WooCommerce, and possibly that WooCommerce would be stuck inside of Jetpack. So now Jetpack, this plugin of plugins, would go and have this massive plugin of WooCommerce inside of it. And I think it was mostly said as a joke at first, but then a lot of people started taking it seriously, and George Stefanis, the lead of Jetpack, had to go out and actually say, like, no, this is not going to happen, don't worry about it. And then on not really the opposite side of plugins and plugins is plugins and themes. So with ACF, for example, it's advanced custom fields that allows you to create like custom meta boxes and custom metadata for your site. I bet a lot of people here use it because it's super popular. But anyway, they allow you to go and take that ACF folder and just throw it into your theme. And then when you go and, kind of like how I said with Avada, where they had that issue with Revolution Slider, now you have a plugin in your theme, and whereas when you just have a plugin installed the normal way, you're going to get update notifications when a new release comes out, right? It's going to say, oh, we released a security patch, or we have new features available now, and you just go and hit the one single button, and now you have the newest version. But when you go and bundle it into your theme, now you're not getting those kind of notifications, and now you have an added dependency in your theme itself, right? The reasoning for doing something like that is so that you don't have to worry about someone going and hitting the deactivate button on your plugin and then having your site crashing down all over you. But there are also other ways around that, which I'll kind of get into. So on a tangent with ACF is just custom fields in general. It seems like everyone has their own custom fields plugin. Ali Interactive has a plugin called Field Manager. Web Dev Studios has CMB2. HumanMade has custom meta boxes. And then ACF is super popular too, and I bet there are a handful of others that are available on WordPress.org. A new initiative that's kind of come out recently is the Core Fields API, and they're hoping that it'll be this one thing to kind of rule them all, kind of like the Fellowship of the Ring, right? And it'll allow everyone to go and standardize on a common set of functions that'll go and allow you to create custom fields and whatnot, and also consistently save that data. So the thing that concerns me with all these separate plugins is that everyone is doing their own special thing to go and save it. So like someone might go and serialize their array, and then you have this array that you have to go and like take out of serialization. And someone else might store it a totally different way. Others might go and throw it in a custom table or stuff like that, for example. But if we go and have this one API to go and support everything inside of WordPress itself, then it'll be a much nicer world to live in, knowing that everyone's doing everything the same way instead of anyone doing whatever they feel like. So with plugins, there are like 3 specific hooks that are pretty specific to certain actions that are only occurring once, really. And those are on the activation, the deactivation, and the uninstall. And so like register activation hook is what the activation one is called. And if you're, some plugins would go and use it to install like custom tables, for example. So WooCommerce has like 7 custom tables. A lot of the popular post plugins or related post plugins will go and add a table in there to go and make it faster for them to go and search what plugins to display, for example. It would be like a cache table holding an index value. So that kind of stuff goes and adds a lot of crap to your database. And a bunch of plugins probably go and add special options and whatever to your options table or wherever else it feels like putting stuff. And what a lot of people don't do is deal with stuff on people being developers that are writing the plugins. They don't deal with stuff the same way on the uninstall. They don't clean up after themselves and they leave everything messy. So like, let's say you're going and testing out a half a dozen different plugins to go and figure out what kind of pop-up box you want on your images or anything else. You're testing out e-commerce stuff and doing WooCommerce, WP e-commerce, Easy Digital Downloads, and iThemes Exchange. And all of them are going and adding their custom tables and custom options to the database. If none of them clean up after themselves, now you have this big bloated database. And over time, that's just going to slow your site down. So make sure that when you're writing plugins, you clean up after yourselves so you leave the place a nice area for everyone else to play in afterwards. Along with that is MU plugins. And MU plugins used to mean multi-user. But somewhere in the past, they went and they merged multi-user into WordPress core, and now it's called multi-site, and MU now stands for must use. So if you're using like a multi-site, you can go and throw a bunch of plugins into this MU plugins folder, and it'll be activated across every site on your multi-site network. Or if you're using a single site install and go and throw plugins into the MU plugins folder, it's always going to be activated, and you don't have to worry about your client or your mother or your aunt or someone going and deactivating it on you and then having the site crash down because your theme had a bunch of dependencies on this plugin. So like if you were going and calling the custom fields functions from ACF, for example, and those functions didn't exist, it would be bad news bears. So a little bit about like plugin development and design and making sure that you're planning things out properly. From paper to plugin, figuring out what you want to have at each release is really important. Because me, for example, if I didn't go and sit down with a pen and paper or something else, maybe online, and figure out what features I needed in a first release, I would probably sit there and tinker on it until the world ended and not ever get anything out in front of people because it's never ever good enough, right? We always have one more thing we want to change, one more feature we want to add. So if we can go and plan things out and figure out what we want to have at each release and what a minimum viable product is for us, then we can go and actually get something that sees the light of day and gets out into users' hands so that they can go and play with it, tell you what works, what doesn't work, what they actually need, and actually make the world a better place, maybe a little bit. So I tend to use GitHub for all my stuff because I think it's just a fantastic tool. And aside from even just getting to the development step, its issue tracking is fantastic. So I can go and have people create issue. Well, let's talk about these. So the 4 things I really like it for are issues, milestones, tags, and branches, and I'll go into those now. So issues are cool because it's like any problem that's on the site or any feature that you want to add. And this is for a plugin that I wrote called Transporter. So these are all things that have to be done with it, and 4 of them I wrote, and 2 of them were submitted by other people. So on GitHub, it's kind of like collaborative, right? So people, as long as your repository is private, other people can go and download your code and use it, and maybe submit a pull request and that kind of thing. So when I'm creating issues of stuff that, like, I want these 4 features in version 2.0, I can go and lay them out here, and then assign it to that 2.0 milestone. Or if I have a bunch of things going on, I can go and tag stuff as being, this is a bug, and this is a feature request, and this is an accessibility issue, and that kind of thing. So it keeps everything very organized. So this is what the milestones look like. As you can tell, I'm a little bit delayed on my release cycle right here. I'm like 23 days behind getting that 2.0 out. I just only realized that I set this milestone for myself this morning. So, oh well. A little bit about that plugin, because I'm going to talk about it more in like a couple of slides from now. So Jetpack has this infinite scroll module, and it allows you to go and show posts on your archive page without having to go and click on a next page button. You scroll down, and then it goes and it loads 10 more. So what I did was I extended that functionality and allowed it to go and load more posts on the single post page. So if I'm reading an article, I get to the bottom, and then a new article comes. And then the user doesn't have to go and click onto another page or just end up leaving my site because there's no more content for him to read. Now it's just getting out into his face. And you can go and show some ads because ads are great and everyone likes them, right? So moving on from that, when you're developing your plugins, it's easy to go and make the world a mess for people other than just clouding up their database. You can go and make their sites crash, and then they're going to not be happy with you. And that can happen in one of the few ways, and probably a whole bunch more that I won't even talk about. But one would be like name conflicts. So if your function is named the same as someone else's function, then you're going to have an issue there, and you're going to get like a PHP fatal error. So when you're writing your plugins and you're naming your function names, use prefixes. Like whatever your plugin name is, go and prepend every single function name with the name of your plugin so that you know that no one else is going to possibly name their function that. The other thing to think about is if you're releasing code to the public and it's going to be on like WordPress.org or on GitHub or something, other people might not be using the same version of PHP as you. And WordPress is really, they do a good job of being backwards compatible, but that means that developers have to think about a lot of things when they're releasing code. So if PHP 5.7 is coming out soon, and they have some cool new features in that. Like they have this little spaceship-looking comparison operator, which is kind of nice, and it has a cool name. But I wouldn't be able to go and use that on a site that's running like PHP 5.2 or 5.3, for example. If I do that, then their site's going to break. So code being released to public should use like whatever the least common denominator is, lowest common denominator. And so if 5.3 is supported by WordPress core, make sure that you're using language constructs that are supported by WordPress core. So I think generators are one that came out in like 5.4, for example. That could go and break someone's site that's on 5.3. My own blog was running PHP 5.2 until about 2 months ago, and I was kind of upset with myself for letting that happen, but hey, it happens. And 5.2 doesn't support anonymous functions. So I went and I installed this Field Manager plugin so that I can go and create presentations like this one, which are running on my own personal website. By the way, if you want the slides, they're at plugins.thomasharrigan.com, and they have links and stuff if you want to click on that and see whatever. But anyway, Field Manager has anonymous functions in it, which isn't supported by the version that I had on my server. So when I installed it, I went and I crashed my website. So that was bad. And that was my own fault for not updating because PHP 5.2 isn't supported anymore. But it's an example of what could happen if you're using 5.3 or 5.4 and someone wrote code that only supports 5.5 or 5.6. So when you're writing your plugins, a lot of the power that comes in is in making it a good place for people to go and build off of, use it as a jumping off point. So I keep using WooCommerce as an example because it's so successful and makes boatloads of money for people. And it's so popular because, well, one, it was one of the first-ish players to the scene and they did stuff well, but two, they made it very extendable. So they have lots of hooks and filters available there for developers to go and say, oh, I want to go and create a payment processor that's going to hook in at this point, or I want to go and create these custom coupons, so I need to jump into the checkout process over here. So they allow you to go and create all these customizations around everything from the products themselves and how those display all the way through the checkout process, etc. And it makes it easy for these third-party developers to go and come in and create their things, whether it be the examples I mentioned, or subscription payments, or whatever, chained products, bulk deals, etc. The other thing is pluggable functions. So it's basically wrapping your function in a conditional, and you don't run your function if another function with the same name exists. So it allows you to go and overwrite someone else's function if you want to go and handle things slightly differently. By the way, if people have questions along the way, like, ask them as we have them, because you probably won't remember them by the very end, since I'm talking at like 1,000,000 miles a minute. So another story time. With that transporter plugin that I mentioned, I released it simultaneously on WordPress.org and GitHub at the same time. Well, that's what simultaneously means. Anyway, so I did that, and I got two very drastically different responses from the communities that exist on both of those sites. On WordPress.org, I tended to get 1-star reviews, and that was bad. But on GitHub, I got developer feedback and pull requests and people that were willing to go and try to make the plugin better and more powerful and add new features and stuff like that. So on GitHub, it's a very developer-centric community. So these people are going and grabbing code and tinkering with it and doing stuff anyway, and it's fun for them. On WordPress.org, people typically want to go download something, set it and forget it, and hope that it works great. And if it doesn't, they're going to be kind of upset because they expect everything to be perfect, even though it's made by a person volunteering their time and giving something for free to the community, and they would prefer that you go and be nice and leave some feedback rather than a 1-star review, but hey, it happens. Hi, question.
Okay, so you can sell plugins too, right?
Yeah, just not on WordPress.org.
Okay, so like whenever you put something on GitHub, if you're gonna sell it, you wouldn't put it up because like someone could just like steal your code.
That's a good point and an interesting point. So if you didn't hear, she said if you were going to go and sell a plugin, you wouldn't go and post it on a public repository on GitHub because then people can have the code. And yeah, that does make a lot of sense and it's very logical. There are some people that have been trying to go and see what happens if you don't do that. For example, Pippin Williamson, who runs Electronic Digital Downloads, made all of his code openly available on GitHub and still charges for it. So like other developers can go and bang on it and make it better and submit bug reports and stuff on GitHub, but he still goes and sells it through his website and people can go and pay for the license and whatever. So did it affect?
Download it free from the
Yes. So you can go and just download it free from GitHub, right? And you'll be like, why would I ever pay this guy for the thing? But other people need stuff like support, for example, and they're going to go and pay for that support and the attention that they need. So it's worth it for them. And your typical end user isn't really going to be aware of, oh, maybe I should go and see if this guy has a public repository on GitHub, and I'll go check it out and try to figure out how to go and download the zip file and make it work. Whereas in WP admin, I can just click that one button and it'll go and auto unzip it and install it and stuff. So there's kind of an ease of use thing there, and other stuff related to the support would be like passive resources, like possibly documentation and tutorials are behind a paywall or something. And if you want to go and continue having that support over time, maybe it has a license, and if that license is deactivated and they see that your subscription is no longer valid, then you don't get support and that kind of stuff. So it's definitely something that's interesting, and it's kind of new too, so it's sort of like, well, let's see how this plays out. I respect you for doing it, but I'm probably not going to do it myself, you know, that kind of deal. What? Sticky how?
Well, there are issues that are coming up that are old issues, but for instance, there's like this whole WordPress.org, WordPress.com versus thesis, which has been going on.
Yeah.
In fact, there was an article yesterday.
There have been articles like every day, and they probably won't stop.
Yeah. But anyway, so yes, it is kind of new, but it's also kind of old too.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, you know, how can you like make everybody happy? And I think it's maybe, isn't it like a new issue because so many more people are coming out with, you know, various ways of making money on the open source.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the way that it really works the best is, like you said, with like the support issue.
Yep. I think that makes sense.
You know, and having the code available, but
Right.
it's really the support because a lot of people don't
Sure, and even with paid plugins and themes, if you look hard enough, you can go and find it for free on some website that'll go and supply you a zip file or maybe charge you like a quarter as much as what the actual site is doing. But on those kind of sites, you're also unsure of what the code quality is. Maybe they went and injected some malware or some advertisements or something to go and serve their own needs. So you don't know that you're getting the canonical code.
Oh, but I was thinking like if a developer was short on cash and they needed some ideas, they might see yours and like just either steal it directly and then like, you know, they're a pretty good developer or whatever, so they have like all the tutorials and they put it like on the WordPress site or I mean, I don't know, like they make it available, like trying to pass it off as theirs. Like, has that ever happened?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there are people that'll go and try to do slimy things. Part of the GPL is kind of like you have the freedom to do anything as long as you're not voiding like copyright and trademarks and stuff like that,
So
right?
it's not a copyright if it's on GitHub?
Stuff can still be copywritten, right? And trademarked and whatever, I suppose. I'm definitely not a lawyer, so don't take anything I say as canonical. Steve?
I mean, actually, if you want one of the bigger stories, just go, when you get done, Google WooCommerce and Meetup. And that is one of the biggest stories of an open source plugin being forked to another open source plugin that was incredibly successful and later on made the people who essentially borrow the code a lot of money. And that's a really good story because what open source is. I mean, you also you can sell WordPress. You can sell WordPress if you want to. You can sell it, you can rename it, you can do whatever you want with it. And it's completely legal to do so.
As long as you don't call it WordPress and get rid of the W logo.
Right, as long as you don't trade, you infringe on the trademark, you can do whatever you want.
Right, yeah. So,
And keep the license intact.
yeah. So what was just mentioned a second ago with Thesis, which is a theme, it's a theme that doesn't use GPL. And there are some legal gray areas around that over whether or not it's legal for this theme to not be GPL'd and use a proprietary license because it's built on top of WordPress, which is GPL, and all derivative works are supposed to use the GPL license as well. So that's like a paid theme that is kind of in this gray area, which I'd rather see a lawyer deal with than read another article about it. So, forget where I left off, but basically GitHub ends up being like a collaborative environment, and I like using it a lot when I'm in the development process or even after I've released the plugin and I'm continuing to do stuff because I know other people are going to go and contribute things if they find it interesting. Whereas on WordPress.org, it should be more of a polished product, and I wouldn't go and release like an alpha version of something there because I know that if someone hits a bug, I'm going to get slammed with 1-star reviews, and it's going to be very hard to recover from that when I do get to that stable version, because at that point my trust has been compromised with the users, right? Because they go and see this 1-star review as a vote of unconfidence, basically. So another thing to, maybe it's my next slide. No, it's not. It'll be there. Anyway, when you go and throw your plugin onto WordPress.org, eventually, once you hit like a stable version after developing on GitHub, if you choose to go that route, getting decent download counts is kind of one of those things that you really want, right? Because why else would you go and put it down out there? You don't want to go and see like one person downloads per week and you get 0-star reviews. Not a 0-star review, but no star reviews. So one of the ways that I found that's been super, super helpful in making my download counts go up is by adding lots of images. And there are a few places in the plugin that you can go and add those. And the first one is the plugin icon. So like when you're in the WP admin dashboard and you go and search for plugins, you're going to go and see something that looks like that. Same thing on the WordPress.org site. And it's going to go and show this icon here. But if you don't have an icon, it just shows like a random color in a square background. And it kind of looks like you don't care, right? So put a little effort into going and throwing it up an icon. It doesn't have to be super beautiful. It just has to not be the default colored background. And people will think it's a more polished product, and you'll get more downloads just from that. Also, there's a screenshots section that's in the, well, it's in the screenshots tab on WordPress.org, and you can go and throw up screenshots of what the plugin looks like and what its behavior is and maybe what the settings pages look like. Because going and typing out a description is great, but it doesn't show people what it is until they actually go and download it. So when you go and let them see what the result of installing the plugin is before they install it, it's going to increase your download count. And this is what my increase in downloads looked like when I went and added those screenshots to this plugin. Not that it's astronomically different, but percentage-wise, going from like maybe 4 downloads a day to 15 the day that I released it, and much higher than what it was doing beforehand in the days and months afterwards, it definitely speaks for itself. show users what they're getting, and they're more likely to install it. Yep.
Okay, so you only do, you only make free plugins?
Most of, yeah.
So like, why? Why do you do it?
So, okay, it's not as strictly, yeah, but so Woo Slider, when I was at Woo Themes, that was a paid plugin. You can go and buy a license right now for like $100 and go and have Woo Slider. So that was a paid plugin, and I was doing it for my employer, right? Stuff that I release on WordPress.org is mostly because I make my living on WordPress, and if I go and I build something that's useful to other people, I'll go and I'll put it out there, and potentially they can go and help me make it better. And I feel like I've gone and given something back, whether it be like code, like, hey, I made a plugin, or I'm going to go and help out with some documentation on WordPress.core, or I'm going to go and speak at a WordCamp or something. Just going and giving back, I think, to a community that has given me my paycheck and my career, right, I think is kind of, it's almost not even. I'm still making out better, right, than they are, but at least I'm trying to go and give something back. So at the end of the day, it's kind of just like doing what I can to give value to other people that have given me value in the past. And the third place you can go and add images is in this banner area on the top of where your plugin is on the WordPress.org page. So most of my plugins don't have one because I've been lazy, but I'll usually at least add screenshots to stuff. So I'm about halfway there as far as doing things that I should do. And that's kind of a common theme with me, I guess. Back on this page, you'll also see that there's aside from the last updated thing, which is over here, which you might not be able to read, take it on faith that it's there. There's also a compatible thing, and it says what version of WordPress the plugin is compatible to. So if you don't do anything else to your plugin between like major releases of WordPress, at least just go and check it on the next version, and if it still works, go and update that thing to say it works with the newest version. So that way people don't think that your plugin is stale or it doesn't work with the newest version of WordPress, because that's going to make your download counts plummet.
I have a question about that.
Yeah.
How do you test multiple versions? Do you literally have to install different versions of WordPress and test it in every version?
Good question. So the question asked was if I go and have multiple versions of WordPress installed so I can go and test on every version to make sure it's compatible. Usually I'll have like maybe 2 versions, and those 2 versions are usually whatever the current version is and whatever the next version coming out is. So like right now 4.3 is coming out, right? So the beta version of that is already available, and it's in like its 3rd iteration of being in beta. So I can go and test that out and see if my plugin is going to be working on that upcoming release. And I know whether or not it's working on the current version because that's what I've been running it on. And then the day that the next version of WordPress comes out, I can go and increment that thing to the current version. So my development environments, I run varying vagrants, which makes it really easy to go and have multiple vagrant installs, which is a virtual environment for running code on your computer instead of having it on a hosted website somewhere. And I'll go and I'll have a bunch of different installs, and I'll have like the development branch and the stable branch and whatever, maybe 1 or 2 others. And I'll go and test themes and plugins and whatnot on there. And even with client sites, if I'm working on any project, I do it in a vagrant environment because it's the fastest way for me to go and test out code and then push it up to a staging server somewhere and go through the process. So yeah, usually like 2 versions being the current and the next version, and that's usually pretty much all you need. If your code is working with the current version of WordPress, it's probably going to work with the previous versions of WordPress, because like backwards compatibility is a big thing, first of all. But like say that they got rid of a function at some point between 2 releases ago and now. You're obviously not using that function in your current one, so you don't kind of have to worry about that. The only thing that would change is like new changes that are coming up in the next version, so making sure that there's nothing incompatible there. And usually it's very minor, if anything, since WordPress is so crazy about being backwards compatible anyway. So they make.wordpress.org has a blog that goes over like whatever changes are coming out in any release cycle, and there are multiple blogs for different things like UX, accessibility, mobile, WordPress core itself, and they'll go and talk about whatever stuff developers may need to go and change in an upcoming version. Like last version, I think there was a change to how plugins activate or deactivate. So some small fraction of plugins may have been doing it that way, so they went and they made like a release notice saying, hey, check your plugin and make sure that it's working correctly. Does that answer? Okay, cool. When doing WordPress.org stuff and you go and release a plugin, support is definitely an issue, and it's one of those things that I don't like doing and usually don't do. but should do. So I go and I put something out there, and then it's kind of like, hey, you're on your own. So I kind of feel bad about that sometimes, but not too bad because I gave someone something for free. Hey. So sometimes I'll write documentation, and the better the documentation there is, the more likely it is that someone may read the documentation. But in most cases, no one's going to ever read your documentation. And even if you write the best thing in the world, someone is just going to go and try to get the direct line of support to you and send you a private email or submit a ticket or leave you a 1-star review rather than going and reading the docs. So if you have a plugin that requires like any kind of actual setup, like even if they just have to go and tick a checkbox or something, you're probably going to get support requests for it because people are not going to read your documentation. So I guess the best thing in the world to possibly do would be automatically go and set things up the way that they need to be set up and make any rational assumptions that need to be made as far as how the plugin should be set up to work on their environment. Obviously, you can't go and figure out every possible thing under the sun that can happen because some guy might be running a really weird server configuration and there's just no way to get around it. But if you can go and figure out the issue that's going to affect the majority of your users, that's pretty common. You should probably just go and solve it rather than go and write like, you know, a page of documentation about it. And here's a cat picture, because cat pictures are great. It reads PEBCAC, which means problem exists between keyboard and chair. And so basically it comes down to user error, but it happens. And like I mentioned that I don't do support on WordPress.org. I'm not saying that there's not value in providing support, and I think it's great to do that. I mean, I got my start in the WordPress community by doing support at WooThemes for 1.5 years. But when releasing stuff on WordPress.org, at some point there has to be a balance between customer happiness or user happiness and my happiness, right? So if I can go and take care of all the lowest hanging fruit and give a positive experience for the majority of users, then that's a win in my book. And the one guy that has that wacky server configuration, maybe he can find a different plugin that works better for him. So support in general, that was kind of .org support, which kind of carries up to other things. But I mean, if you're doing like paid plugins and stuff, obviously your support should probably be a little bit better than my laissez-faire approach, I guess. So having documentation is great. And in the event that someone goes and raises a support ticket with you, you could at least go and point them to the docs if the answer is there in the case that you went and took a little bit of time to write some decent documentation, which you should do. And also tutorials are awesome whenever you go and release a plugin. Having like a demo site where people can go and check it out as long as it's something that can be, you know, checked out, assuming that it's outputting something on the front end rather than being like solely an admin dashboard type functionality thing like Edit Flow or a plugin like that. Anyway, tutorials are great. Video tutorials are also awesome. You know, go and walk through the setup process. I think if you go, you can include videos in the WordPress.org like description page. So including a video there is usually a good idea. I tend to watch them, so I don't know if that's typical of your average user, but if there's a button with a play icon there, I'll usually click it and see what's going on. Customer happiness, yeah. So plugins definitely differ a lot with themes as far as their life cycles go. When a theme gets released, it's going to have its spike in sales as soon as it's released, and then it's going to like slowly peter off over time. And also people are going to go and be modifying the theme or creating child themes on top of it to go and create customizations, and they're making those customizations based on the current layout. So it's really hard to go and make any kind of big change to a theme after it's released because people have been customizing it, and if you do a layout change, then everything is going to break for everyone else, and it's bad news bears. And plus, after you release that initial thing, your sales are going down anyway, so it's usually hard to justify going and creating new updates over time other than just like security patches and stuff like that. Versus plugins, where a plugin is usually adding, like, it's separate from your theme, right? And if you have hooks and filters and stuff available, people are going to go and utilize those to make their customizations rather than editing the core plugin itself. So you can go and introduce some new functionality over time. I mean, that doesn't hold true for every single plugin in the world. Like if I go and make a payment processor, for example, it's very rarely going to need to change because it's only doing like one single thing and it's pretty simplistic. But something like WooSlider, for example, the initial release supported slides, posts, and images. And I went and started tinkering on it in my free time, and I added support for like portfolios and testimonials and whatever other custom post types I felt like. And then the lead dev was like, hey, you should go and start working on version 2.0 and be the lead dev for that. So I was like, hey, cool. And I went and added in a bunch of integrations for video functionality. So integrated with the YouTube API and Wistia and Vimeo. so that if I went and hit the play button, then the auto scrolling on the slider would stop. Or if I went and scrolled to the next slide, it would stop auto playing, stop playing the video, so I didn't have this phantom sound in the background coming without any video to watch. So that type of stuff, it just makes the experience better, and I don't have to worry about it breaking something because it never existed before, and no one's basing their layout on a video API. So there's definitely a lot of differences, but a lot of similarities, and keeping your functionality code in a plugin allows you to go and do stuff like adding new features over time rather than having the kitchen sink inside of your theme, in which case you're kind of stuck with this whole big mess of code. So if you're looking to maybe adopt a plugin rather than starting fresh with a new plugin, you just want to like get involved and do a service to WordPress itself. There are a whole bunch of people that have like written plugins, and over time they get busy and have kids or get a job or something like that, and they can no longer go and maintain their plugins. But they don't want the plugin to just die, because after 2 years of no updates, you get this big ugly yellow banner on your WordPress.org plugins page that says this hasn't been updated in 2 years, and it looks really crappy. So people will go and put their plugins up for adoption. And you can go and like email them or get in touch with them on Twitter or whatever else and be like, hey, I want to adopt this plugin. I like what you're doing. I don't want it to die. I want it to live on and help the existing 20,000 users that are currently using it so they still have a good experience. So that's definitely an easy win for getting involved in the WordPress community. I ended up adopting a plugin called, I don't remember what it was called, Evergreen Post Tweeter. And it goes and it takes your old blog posts and it goes and sends it out to people. Well, sends it out on Twitter. So that this post doesn't go and never ever get seen by the light of day again. And it's pretty cool. It definitely has a lot of stuff that needs to be updated since it hasn't been updated in a while. And it's going to be kind of a big overhaul, but it was this really neat functionality that and it had a download count of like 16,000 or so. So it has a sizable current user base, and it seemed worth it to go and make this thing live on rather than just rot. Also, WordPress core uses plugins itself to go and fuel its own core development. So a lot of plugins will start, well, nowadays, any new feature for core, like a big feature, gets proposed as a feature plugin. So it goes and starts its life as a plugin, and then people get on board with it. They say, oh, this is cool, I want to help out, and a team forms around it. And people start banging on the plugin, working on it, building it out, letting other people use it and try it and test it. And then if people like it and it's something that is deemed like it should be in WordPress core, then it'll go and get merged in at some point. But having it like this way allows core development to occur without introducing this new functionality that then has to be maintained, and possibly it ends up that this was a feature that never ever should have been in core to begin with. I think a decent example of that that's gotten some attention lately is post formats. I don't know if anyone here has used post formats, but it came into WordPress core basically to compete with Tumblr. And it's like this microblog format where you go, oh, I'm posting a video or an aside or a quote, or this is a chat message. And no one really uses WordPress this way. At least a very small percentage of people do. And it's kind of fallen out of use over the last few years. And it's been in WordPress for years, but it's hardly ever used, and there's no consistency around how it's used. But you're stuck with whatever post formats WordPress core gave you. So you get like 9 formats that you can choose from. I mean, I'm not usually posting Skype messages a lot or quotes and stuff on my blog, but hey, it's one of like 9 standard post formats. And if I ever wanted to go and introduce something new, like I want a gallery post format or a Twitter post format where it'll go, or embed for that matter, just any embeddable thing that I throw into my post, I want it to be that thing. There's nothing I can do about it because I'm limited by what core gave me. So this is a feature that probably should have started out as a feature plugin so that lots and lots of other people could go and test it out for their use cases and see how it worked for their needs. And we probably would have had a much more robust outcome, with possibly being able to go and add your post format, own custom post formats and things like that, and maybe have some standardization around how these post formats are going to display. Because for me personally, I think the common use case for wanting to use a post format is I have a piece of content and it contains a video, and the video is the most important piece of content in there, so I'm going to show that to you on the blog page or an archive, for example, so that you're more likely to click on it because that's the core piece of content, rather than the standard layout that we have now where pretty much everything is an excerpt, an image, and a title. So everything looks the same, but all these posts are different. People went and poured their time and heart into writing this content, but you're no less likely to click on it because it looks exactly the same as everything else. Anyway, that's kind of a tangent. So these are all features that have already made their way into WordPress core. And this listing here is a bunch of features that are in current development and could possibly make their way into WordPress core in the near future. So some of the ones that are kind of notable on there are like 2-factor authentication. So that would make WordPress a lot more secure, so you can go and use your phone to like type in a key code, so that you have to have 2 levels of verification there. It's kind of self-explanatory. Menu customizer is one that's going to be going in the next release cycle, and that takes advantage of the existing customizer functionality and allows you to go and create menus inside that visual customizer dashboard, so you get a live preview going on there. And then there's some other stuff that are still in various stages of development or being hashed out as far as what the goals are. So like the core fields API, I don't think it's not even listed on there as far as I can see, because it's too early, but it's going to end up on there at some point once they figure out what they specifically want it to be, and then it'll get added to that list and more people will bang on it and WordPress will be better. So I talked a lot. You guys let me know if you have questions. Anything that you want to learn more about. I definitely touched on like 20 different micro topics of plugins and development and such. What do I use to test my plugins? Yeah, usually just point and click and see if I can find anything. Specifically, I'll go and I'll have debug mode on and I'll be logging my queries and stuff like that. Make sure that it's not going and doing anything crazy wacky. Make sure that I'm not throwing fatal errors or undefined indexes on arrays and stuff like that. As far as making sure that the plugin is compatible with other themes and other plugins, I'll test it around with some common cases, like a half a dozen really popular themes maybe. At the very least, I'll test it with the core themes, so like 2010 through 2015, those default themes that are available, because those are all themes that are like doing it the right way. So other themes are supposed to go and do things kind of like that way anyway. Maybe a few major plugins like Gravity Forms, WooCommerce, a caching plugin or two, and make sure that it's not doing anything crazy wacky or not performing properly when a caching plugin is activated, for example. Because if I have like a related post plugin on or a popular post plugin on, and my caching plugin is caching stuff for really, really long, then those related posts or popular posts are never going to change, even though the view counts have gone and dramatically changed over the last day and a half since I published new content. So like those were things I'd want to be aware of. As far as testing environments go, usually just Vagrant, and maybe I'll throw it on a test server somewhere.
Anything automated?
Me personally, no. You should, but I don't. As far as I mean, I hate to say it, but I hardly even use unit testing. So unit testing is a way of going and writing code to handle the common use cases of what functions should be outputting or how errors should work and that kind of stuff. So like sometimes I'll have friends bang on it and poke on things because they're going to use things dramatically different than I am. I built it. I know exactly how I intended for someone to use it, but someone else is going to go and have a different way of what they think is normal. So they might go and do something I never ever possibly expected anyone to try to do with my plugin, and then it ends up breaking the world. So just some common stuff like that, but usually, for better or worse, I mean, I'll get it to what I deem to be an arbitrary stable point on GitHub, and then I'll just put it out to the world and hope for the best, and they'll tell me if it works or not. So like that transporter plugin, for example, I made assumptions on what theme structures look like. So it has to figure out what the container wrapper is so that it can go and add your posts to it. So if it doesn't figure out what the container wrapper is, then it's going to go and add the post to some random place, like maybe the bottom of your header or like underneath your footer or something, and it's going to look totally botched. Or maybe it won't go and grab the right template, and all you're left with is a comments box instead of having the actual post content. So that got me a lot of 1-star reviews. And it's one of those things that's on that 2.0 release, which was supposed to come out 23 days ago. And hopefully I'll find a smarter way of figuring out what a container wrapper is, and I'll use some JavaScript to do that.
To answer your question, in terms of automation, unit testing is the way to go. WordPress itself has unit testing. You can download the WordPress unit tests. They're a good resource if you're writing your own unit tests. A good place to start. And when I first started writing unit tests, I downloaded the WordPress unit test and I used that as a resource. So it's a good idea to start. And it works really well. Obviously, so unit testing is good. And there's also acceptance testing, which is more automation where it literally simulates mouse clicks and user logins, and you can automate 50 browsers, the same stuff in 50 different browsers in a matter of seconds if you want to really automate the stuff.
And for like JavaScript, there's QUnit. And if you're writing a theme to go up on WordPress.org, they have a bunch of theme tests that they run through as well.
Plugin. I think it's a plugin.
Yeah, that sounds right.
There's a
Cool.
plugin, there's a-
There's always a plugin for everything, right? That's kind of the power of WordPress.
There's a plugin for that.
Yeah. And this was before iOS came out, right? So there's an app for that. What other questions we got?
Is Vagrant that much better than Map Safer? I just started exploring.
So I had been using MAMP for a really, really long time. And I'm really not a fan of changing what tools I use because I get used to them, and anything that changes my workflow is kind of like, no, stay away. But as far as being able to run multiple environments at the same time, yeah, something like Vagrant is a whole lot better, and I can have, half a dozen or infinite number of WordPress installs going on and not run into any issues. With MAMP, what I used to do was I hacked around for a bunch of hours one day and figured out how to make a multi-site work. And I eventually got it working, and it wasn't nearly as easy as I thought it should have been. But at least I was able to go and have a bunch of different sites running, but they were all in the same server configuration, right? Because it was all part of one multi-site. So with Vagrant, I can go and simulate a whole bunch of different hosting environments. I can go and run Nginx on one and have HHVM on another. Maybe one's chilling on Apache. So yeah, I've definitely, varying Vagrant vagrants is the Vagrant package for WordPress that's really popular. And it's under very active development. I think it's developed by Jeremy Felt, right? And I think that's kind of in conjunction with 10up. And they do a good job. They're very proactive about releasing updates to it and stuff. And there are people that go and write their own plugins and additional functionality for creating additional setups. So like you can go and download one for throwing up multi-site installs really easily. Or and the base one that you download comes with a develop, a trunk, a source, and a default, and maybe one other. So you get like 4 installs off the bat, and then you can add a bunch of others. And then there are some for like auto site generation scripting, so you can make it really easy to go and fire up new ones without a hitch, and adding the new URLs to your host directory so that they resolve and that kind of stuff. So definitely check it out. It's really easy. The documentation on setting it up is super easy to follow. They're only Vagrant can be used for anything. Varying Vagrant vagrants is for WordPress specifically. Yeah.
Do you promote your plugins, or do you just drop it?
So after I release it, do I promote my plugins? After I release it, I'll usually fire out a tweet, and maybe every once in a while I'll write a blog post when I write a plugin that I really, really like. For the most part, I don't do a whole lot more than that. So I wrote a plugin called Post Styles, which implements post formats in the way that I wish it was made to begin with. And I think it's really, really awesome, but it has a very low user count. It was the graph I showed before. It's getting like maybe 5 to 10 downloads a day at most. But it's cool, and I don't promote it because no one cares about post formats to begin with. But I was at WordCamp Columbus the other day, and one of the core committers was there, Drew Janes. He works at 10up, and he was the release lead on 4.2, I think. That sounds about right. And I talked to him about it, and he was totally stoked about it. So I made him a contributor on my GitHub project, and now we're collaborating on making it something that can maybe be proposed as like a core feature. So that's kind of like the most marketing I did for that plugin, right? Other than like a tweet and like hoping that one of the news outlets like WP Tavern picks up on it is kind of the most I hope for. Other than that, I'll talk to friends about it, or if I'm giving like a WordCamp presentation where I utilized it in a huge site and it's just like some peripheral thing that I'm talking about in there of how to go and leverage this new functionality that I worked on, then yeah, I'll talk about it there. But I've never done any like advertising or something around my plugins. And I'm not really writing paid plugins or anything either. So if I was writing something and hoping for my paycheck or some kind of supplemental income to be coming from it, I'd be doing a heck of a lot more, definitely. And if you're trying to do something like that, happy to talk to you about it. Because I mean, I've done the commercial stuff too in the past, and maybe someday in the future. But right now, most of the plugin development I'm doing is either free stuff or for client projects. Like I work on like the New York Post, Politico Europe, and Digiday a lot right now. So I'll be creating a lot of plugins that are used for internal use and usually aren't seen by other people unless it's something that we can bring out in open source. So there's not really much I can usually say about like anything that I build that's proprietary, but sometimes I can go and showcase what I built. So yeah. Any other questions? Hi. My background?
Yeah, what you
So I went to school at SUNY Geneseo, which is a state school just south of Rochester. I was a computer science student, graduated in about 5 years, which was a little bit longer than most people, but I started my software company when I was like a sophomore or junior, so I was kind of doing like part-time school, part-time running the company. And then I graduated, and as soon as I graduated, I threw my dorm room crap into my co-founder's apartment in that basement apartment in Brooklyn. And then we were just, coding all day and night. There weren't any full-size windows, so we never knew if it was daylight out. So, yeah. So lots of coding. It was a few years with the nose to the screen and, just hacking away. And then, doing it is really the best way to get good at anything, right? So we work hard, and then it's like, whoa, I finally feel competent. So that took a long time, too. There was like one key moment where I used to mostly work in a cafe around the corner from where I lived, and I would work there all day and drink this endless cup of coffee for $5 and get the jitters and then have a beer. But I felt largely incompetent when I graduated because my background was mostly in theory. With computer science, it's like, oh, I can tell you the time complexity of this algorithm. And it's like, well, when are you ever really going to use that in real life? When I was in college doing an internship, I was writing software for radiology equipment. So I was like, hey, if you have an error, you're going to blast someone with a whole bunch of radiation, and they're going to be dead. So there's no room for error there. And you don't really learn about that too much, like in a classroom environment. So, so it was really what I got after I got the piece of paper and was actually doing real client work that I was finally in real life situations where it's like, oh, I understand why I need to do X, Y, and Z. And then one moment I was working on a calendar application for a yoga studio, and I was like, whoa, I'm a programmer. So.
My son goes to SUNY Geneseo. When did you graduate?
I think I graduated in 2011. I walked like twice, I think. Well, I did walk twice. I snuck in the second time. So I was slated to graduate in 2010, so I walked with them. And then as soon as I walked, I changed my graduation date to the next year. So, yeah. When is your son graduating, or did he graduate?
Finished freshman year.
Okay, cool. What's his name? Or is he in
Hill Point.
any campus organizations?
Yeah, he's like way.
Let's talk after. And okay, cool. Any other questions? I'll also be around all night, I think. And you can also find me on Twitter at Tom Harrigan, Tom Press on YouTube. I also host co-host the WP Dev Table podcast and thomasharrigan.com, which is also where the slides are at plugins.thomasharrigan, so you can get the links and whatever, and slides and pretty cat pictures. Thanks.